Hi folks, and welcome to the Is It Worth It for the SU-100Y, the Tier 6 Russian Premium Tank Destroyer. This tank is available from the gift shop, and it's also available from the tech tree for 3,250 gold. And it's another one of these tanks that shows up on specials, usually 15 to 20% off a few times a year. But the question we're going to be asking today is this tank worth 3,250 gold? And as per usual, let's start with the history of the tank. Now, the SU-100Y was only a prototype, only one was ever built, but it does have quite a lot of history, and that history begins in the 1930s. Because in the 1930s, the Russians had a super heavy tank called the T-35. Now, this was a tank that had 5 turrets. This picture here unfortunately doesn't show all 5 turrets, but it had 2 turrets mounted on the front side by side, 2 turrets on the back mounted side by side, and 1 central turret. And the T-35, although being a super heavy tank with a lot of firepower, unfortunately suffered from mechanical issues. And as a result, in 1939, the Russians designed a successor, and that successor was the T-100. Now, the T-100, shown here with 2 turrets, was actually designed to have 3 turrets, but by the time it reached prototype stage, they had reduced the number of turrets on the T-100 down to 2. Now, why am I talking about super heavy tanks in pre-war Russia when we're talking about the SU-100Y? Well, it's going to be very, very clear from this image. You see, I want you to look at the hull of this tank. Ignore the fact it has 2 turrets, but look at the engine deck back here. You've got this flat area here, the track layout, and then we're going to pop back into the garage. And as you can see, it's the same hull. It's got the same engine deck, same flat area, same hull. Same track designs. So basically the SU-100Y was built on the chassis of the T-100. It also becomes a little bit clearer if we take a look at the front of the tank, because we've got driver's viewport, we've got some sloping, we've got the lower glacis, and we've got a couple of tow cable connections here. I'm not sure what the technical term for those are. The hull on an SU-100Y is the T-100. And that hull design, with some modifications, spawned a lot of single turreted versions of the T-100. Tanks like the KV-1, the KV-2, and the KV-1S. You know, different turrets, different guns, but basically all built around the same hull, the T-100 hull. Now, the SU-100Y was never meant to be a tank destroyer. In fact, it was built as an SPG. It was originally mounted with a 152mm gun that the KV-2 got. It was an SPG that could also perform as a transport vehicle. It could move equipment and ammunition and explosives to the front line. It was designed as a bridge layer. It was also designed for vehicle recovery, so it could recover broken down or damaged tanks from the battlefield. It was multi-purpose, but it was originally designed as an SPG. Now, somewhere along the design process, the 152mm howitzer was replaced with a long barrel 152mm. Even further along on the design, it was decided that the 152mm howitzer was probably a little bit overkill, so they replaced it with a 130mm naval gun. Now, you're probably asking yourselves, what exactly is a naval gun? And there are lots and lots of websites that will basically explain this better than I can. But essentially, at its most basic, a naval gun is a howitzer. However, howitzers are usually short-barreled. They don't have that much range. They have a high shell trajectory, they have slow shell velocity, and they're not that accurate, or they're not as accurate as a long barrel gun. So by making the barrel longer, what you're actually doing is you're increasing the shell velocity, you're increasing the range of fire, and you're increasing the accuracy. So it's essentially still a howitzer. It could deliver its HE payload further with more accuracy and faster. And that's essentially the difference between a naval gun and a regular gun. Not much difference, except it's a howitzer that was designed to fire more HE ammunition than AP. But there are much, much better explanations, and lots of other explanations on the internet get into whether or not it could actually fire the same amount of HE because the shell casing needed to be thicker, or whether or how much thicker the gun barrel needed to be in order to deliver that payload. There's lots and lots of discussion. I'm not going to go into that, but essentially, It's a howitzer that has a longer barrel, so it's more accurate, fires like a regular tank gun, but was still designed to fire HE. Once it had been decided to mount the 130mm on the T-100X, the internal structure of the tank was changed in order to make the reload a little bit smoother and a little bit faster. And once those changes had been made during the design stage and in the blueprints, the tank became known as the SU-100Y, so it changed project name from T-100X to SU-100Y. The designs were sent to the factory and the first prototype was built. However, by the time the prototype was built, the KV-2, the KV-1 and the KV-1S were all performing quite well. The winter war between Russia and Finland that originally the SU-100Y was designed for was over, and the SU-100Y project was scrapped. The only prototype was sent to Kubinka. In 1941, after the start of Operation Barbarossa and the advance of the German army on Moscow, the SU-100Y was called back into service along with a lot of the other prototypes that were sitting around Kubinka. The Russians were throwing every single resource they had left at the German advance, so it ended up being or fulfilling the original role it was designed to do, which was basically be an SPG. It was put into a makeshift prototype SPG artillery division along with the SU-14 prototype and the SU-14-1 prototype, and it did take part in the battle for Moscow. However, the rest of its combat history is unknown, and the tank still exists today. It still exists in Kubinka Tank Museum. So one of the things I think people don't appreciate about the SU-100Y is just how big this tank is. Very few reviews about this tank mention how big it is. And when we compare it to some other Tier 6 TDs, like for example the Hellcat, you can see how small the Hellcat there is compared to the SU-100Y. This thing is absolutely huge, and the only way I could think of to make maybe this a little bit more obvious is let's look at Tier 10s and let's look at an E100. We take a look at the E100, one of the biggest tanks in the game, and let's take a look at the SU-100Y, and you can see that the SU-100Y is actually taller than an E100. Not by much, but it is taller than an E100. It's also longer than an E100 is. Now the E100 does look longer because it's got a longer turret, but if you look at the hull is longer on an SU-100Y, and because of this raised engine deck, the actual back of the tank is very, very similar in size to the E100. It's actually bigger than an E100. Although as I say, the turret size on an E100 does make it look a little bit bigger, but I don't think people appreciate just how big this tank is when they play it. It doesn't seem this big, it doesn't feel this big, but it is. It's an absolutely huge tank. Now, unfortunately, I don't actually own the other Tier 6 Russian TD, the regular SU-100 in-game, so I'm going to have to use Tank Compare just to do a very, very quick comparison between these two tanks. We've got top values on both, and essentially, in Tank Compare, the SU-100Y is worse in almost every single way to the in-game SU-100. It gets more hit points, but it's got worse signal range, worse speed limit, worse reverse speed. It's slightly different crew layout, but it gets worse frontal armor. It does get more side and rear armor, but it gets worse frontal armor than the in-game SU-100. It gets a more powerful engine, but it has less horsepower to weight ratio because it's a very heavy tank. Its traverse speed is worse. It has the same climb angle. Its ground resistance is worse. The chance of going on fire after getting hit is worse. The view range is identical to the in-game SU-100Y, but the gun traverse is slower than it is on the SU-100, and the traverse arc is less. It gets 10 degrees compared to 12 degrees. It does have more alpha damage, but when you look at the DPM on the SU-100 is much, much better. SU-100 has better rate of fire, better reload, and same aim time with more gun depression. About the only place where the SU-100Y beats the SU-100 is its accuracy and its alpha damage. But other than the SU-100Y getting more hit points, better accuracy, and bigger alpha damage, it's beaten by the SU-100 in almost every other single category. So even though the gun on the SU-100Y is very, very scary, when it all balances out, I don't think the SU-100Y is as good as the in-game SU-100, but that doesn't make it a bad tank. So now that the SU-100 is out of the way, let's compare it against some of the other Tier 6 TDs I have in my garage, and we're going to be comparing it against the other Tier 6 premium tank destroyer, the Dickermax for the Germans. We're also going to be comparing it against the Nashorn, the Jackson, and the Hellcat. Now, they're the only three other TDs I've actually kept in my garage at Tier 6. But straight away, just like the SU-100, you can see that the hit points are very, very good on the SU-100Y. It gets 700 hit points, so much, much better than its premium rival, the Dickermax, and significantly more hit points than the other three regular in-game tanks. When it comes to weight, you've got to remember that the SU-100Y was built on the chassis of the T-100, a super heavy tank, and as a result, this SU-100Y is a very, very heavy TD. It comes in at about 65 tons for me. Now that makes it almost 3 times heavier than some of the TDs up here. Over 3 times heavier than a Hellcat. It's a very, very heavy tank. Now again, you're going to see a lot of people talk about how good this tank is at ramming. Let me just say that if you go around the battlefield trying to ram enemy tanks to death in the SU-100Y, you're doing it wrong, because most enemy tanks or players, if they know what they're doing, they're just going to shoot you from distance, or they're not going to let you get within ram distance, or they're just going to get to your side and rear. But the possibility of ramming enemy tanks is there. Just don't go looking for it. If it does happen, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Now, it's a very heavy tank, but it also has a very good engine, 890 horsepower compared to any of the other TDs up here. But you've got to remember, because it's such a heavy tank, even though it's got an amazing engine, the horsepower to weight ratio is a lot worse on the SU-100Y than it is on some of these tanks. So it doesn't accelerate as well as maybe people would have you believe. I've seen people describe this tank as quite fast and the maneuverability being quite good. It's not when you compare it to other TDs of its own tier. It can be quite sluggish. It can reach 35 kilometers an hour, but it can be quite sluggish, and it's really, really painful going uphill. The bad horsepower to weight ratio really shows when you're trying to go uphill. So while it's not a slow tank and it's not unmaneuverable, I just don't think when people describe this as a maneuverable TD, they're taking into consideration all the other tier 6 TDs in the game. Basically, it's not that fast, it's not that maneuverable, but it's not painfully slow either. The tank is fast enough to keep up with the action, it's fast enough to relocate if it needs to, and it does need to quite frequently, but I'd say it's medium-ish. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but it's playable. The hull armor on paper looks quite good at 60 millimeters all round, front, side, and rear. And compared to a lot of the other tier 6 TDs, it does look good. I mean, it's got more armor front, rear, and side than the Dickermax or the Nashorn. The Jackson has it beaten frontally, but the Jackson has much worse side and rear armor, and then the Hellcat is famously bad regarding its hull armor, its side armor. But the Hellcat does get more frontal turret armor and more rear armor, surprisingly. But 60 millimeters on paper doesn't look too bad compared to the other TDs. However, it is bad. 60 millimeters all round, considering this tank does not get special matchmaking. A lot of tier 6s are going to be able to pen your tank with absolutely no problems. A lot of tier 7s and pretty much every tier 8 in the game is just going to chew you up. About the only time you can count on your 60 millimeters of armor is when you're top tier in a tier 6 game, and you got a lot of tier 4s and maybe some tier 5s shooting at you. The view range is also poor on the tank. Now, this is a premium tank. The view range never got nerfed on this tank, not like a lot of the other TDs in the game that got view range nerfs. Because the SU-100Y is a premium tank, it didn't get a view range nerf, but even still, the view range on the SU-100Y is very, very poor. 350 meters. When you compare this to the 400 meters of the Dickermax, which wasn't nerfed because it's another premium tank, or you compare it to the tanks you can get in-game, the Nashorn, the Jackson, and the Hellcat. Even though these are nerfed view ranges, they are still better than the SU-100Y. And the signal range is awful on the tank as well, only 440 meters, so if you go one flank, you will lose contact with tanks that happen to be on the other flank. So it's not looking so good for the SU-100Y on paper. Now, just while we're on the armor, as I say, I don't want to go into Tank Viewer for this, because basically it's 60 millimeters all round. The top of the tank, the turret roof, and the engine is only 20 millimeters thick, so Arty absolutely loves shooting SU-100Ys, A, because of their size, and B, because of their poor armor. Arty will usually hit a penetrating shot and can one-hit kill SU-100Ys. However, the armor does increase. It is slightly better on the tank in places. This narrow strip here is actually about 70 millimeters, so not much better than 60 millimeters. But also the gun mantlet is spaced armor. However, the gun mantlet is covering 0 millimeters of armor. So the spaced armor on the gun mantlet doesn't have any armor behind it. However, this area, this strip of armor here is considered 50 millimeters of spaced armor, and directly behind that you've got 20 millimeters of spaced armor. So what you have is 70 millimeters on this area of the gun mantlet. If you move to the side, you've actually got worse armor because you've got 50 millimeters of spaced armor here, and this is covering 0 armor on the turret. So even though it's 60 millimeters all around, the armor is 50 millimeters here, 50 millimeters here, and 70 millimeters directly through the middle of the gun mantlet. It can be penned by a lot of tier 6 tanks. It can be penned by a lot of tier 7s and pretty much most tier 8s. So it is possible to get weird bounces with your gun mantlet, but the tank is so big, basically you can't count on your armor. Now, you do have the SU-100Y waggle, which is if you do come into contact with an enemy tank and they're going to be shooting at you, what you could try and do is you can waggle your tank from side to side to try and encourage them to either hit this area of the side of the tank and get a ricochet, or maybe hit your gun mantlet and hopefully your spaced armor will eat it. But as I say, against most tanks, if you bounce anything, just consider it luck. Don't expect to bounce anything in the SU-100Y, and that way when you do bounce something, you'll be surprised. But things change for the SU-100Y when we take a look at the gun. It has a 130mm B13 naval gun, and this is a unique gun. There's no other tank in the game that has this gun, and it is an awesome gun. But even on paper, it doesn't look that good because the rate of fire is only 3.75. That's very, very slow. With a gun rammer and vents and a 100% crew and brothers in arms, your reload is still going to be about 14 seconds between shots. So the DPM on this tank is terrible. Even fully upgraded, fully pimped out, the DPM on this tank is still not very good, and it is the worst DPM of any tier 6 TD in the game. But this tank isn't about DPM. This tank is about alpha damage. It's a Russian TD. It's all about big numbers. And when we take a look at the standard AP, we get to see big numbers. We've got incredible penetration of 196 millimeters of penetration on the standard AP at tier 6. That means that you can pretty much pen any tank you face. A lower tier of same tier, have no problems penning most tier 7s, and have no problems penning most tier 8s. The penetration on the standard AP is very good, and the alpha damage is also very, very good. 440 alpha damage is similar to a tier 10 heavy tank, so very, very good alpha damage. Considering that this tank can face tier 4s, it can face tier 5s, it can be top tier in a tier 6 game. This gun, firing standard AP, can one-hit kill most tier 4s, pretty much about half tier 5s, or shave off about 80 or 90% of most tier 5's health. Against other tier 6s, it can shave off half their health. It can 2-hit kill pretty much every tier 6 it faces. Tier 7s, it can tier 2-hit kill a lot of them, and tier 8s, it can pretty much 3-hit kill pretty much any tier 8 it faces. So the gun is very, very good. The alpha damage is very, very good, but it just doesn't stop there with the standard ammo, because the premium ammo is also exceptionally good on this tank. It does get less penetration than the standard AP. It gets 171 millimeters of penetration, but to put it into context, there are some tier 8 tanks that don't have 171 millimeters of penetration. So 171 is good enough to penetrate any tank this TD can potentially face. If you can hit weak spots on tier 8 tanks, you're going to be able to penetrate them, if not just not worrying about weak spots and just pen them directly. The penetration is exceptionally good, but on the premium ammo, the alpha damage is even higher. You get 510 alpha damage with the premium ammo, and that's why I receive a lot of SU-100Y replays where players are spamming gold. They spam premium ammo almost exclusively. I don't blame players for firing gold in an SU-100Y because the penetration is still very, very good, and the alpha damage is fantastic. So you can one-hit kill a lot of tier 5s and some tier 6s with the premium ammo on this gun. It's very, very good. And then people forget about HE when they're playing the SU-100Y. It is a 130mm gun after all. It gets a very good 65mm of penetration, which means that there are a lot of thinly skinned targets out there that you can one-hit kill with HE in this gun. And you get 580 alpha damage, so this is almost approaching KV2 standards. You can get incredibly high rolls with HE penetration, so you've got three very good ammo choices on this gun. The only issue I have with the SU-100Y is because my reload is about 14 seconds, there are plenty of times I see a Hellcat in the distance and I think, oh, I can switch to HE, but by the time I go through that 14-second reload, the HE or the Hellcat has taken half damage or is already dead or has disappeared off the radar. So switching between shots or switching ammo choices between shots is going to cost you 14 seconds. So quite often in this tank, if I do try to switch up my ammo choices, I end up missing a shot as a result, and I tend to stick with just firing standard AP. But as I say, when you do face SU-100Ys, don't be surprised to see players firing gold, especially if it's one of their favorite premium tanks. The ammo choices are what makes this tank fantastic. It's what makes this gun fantastic. The accuracy is very good at .38. Again, that's not fantastic accuracy, but considering this is Russian and it's a TD, and a tank like the SU-100Y has .42 accuracy, or a tank like the SU-100, I should say, has .42 accuracy. 0.38 on the 130mm is actually very good. It means you can use this as a sniper. You will miss occasionally, but you can use it as a sniper. However, the aim time is not fantastic, but considering you got 14 seconds between shots and you've got a 2.9 second aim time, I don't think it's that bad. It does give you plenty of time to aim fully. So the gun on this tank is absolutely fantastic. Okay folks, let's check out this gun in action. Now this is a perfect test. It's a tier 6 game, we're top tier, and lots of tier 5s, lots of tier, well, not that many tier 4s in the enemy team, but basically enemy team is 4 tier 6s, pretty much the rest of their team is tier 5. And we are top tier with a gun that has 130, or it's a 130mm gun. We've got 198mm of penetration, we've got 440 alpha damage, and here's this poor view range. Unfortunately, no one on our team went to spot middle, so I'm sitting up here, I've let my binocs kick in, and I'm hoping to spot some tanks getting into town. This is why it's usually important to have someone else having pushed up, but there we go. Because my view range is not fantastic, that T1 Heavy was able to get into town. Now I did have a shot, but because I waited for that 2.9 second reload, and because I reached the end of my gun arc, I had to readjust, I missed the opportunity of shooting that T1 Heavy. So it's not really a tank where you can take snapshots. There's an Arl in the distance. There's a KV-1S that's managed to sneak into town before anyone spotted him moving into town as well. Looking for an outline, had a hint of one, he's moving forward, and we can just barely get a shot, and I leave it too late. Shot flies to the left anyway, but misjudged that one slightly. Now, .38 accuracy is okay, but it is Russian, and sometimes the shots do not go where you aim them. Other times the shots go exactly where you aim them. But if you're starting to go up the Russian TD lines, as I say, this is a good tank for Big Alpha. And there we go, we've just shaved off 2/3 of that KV-1's health with one shot. Now, technically speaking, if I'd been firing premium ammo and I'd gotten a high roll, I would have one-hit killed him, but a Churchill 7 shows up, another tier 6 tank, and there's half his health. We've just removed half his health. So I get spotted, and I'm trying to reverse, trying to waggle, because there are enemy tanks, or 3 enemy RT on the enemy team. But it doesn't seem as if anyone's interested in shooting me. Okay, so that's interesting. We're under a little bit of pressure on the 1-2 lines, but we do have a KV-1 and TD defending. And this is where I decide, okay, you know what? A lot of the enemy tanks have been spotted in town, or at least I think they have. I'm using a new mod, and I'm still getting used to the new mod. But I advance forward, and there we go. Lots and lots of spots. So I swing around, T-34-85, tier 6 medium tank, and there goes half his health. This is just a big gun, and again, I have a problem with this tank in that I don't switch between ammo choices. I tend to use AP mainly on the tank because 14-second reload between shots just does not give me the flexibility to be able to switch shots very quickly. But RT appears, we aim, we shoot, and yeah, lower tier tanks, no chance. But there's that armor. That Panzer IV's is just tearing me to pieces. Now, I can't see the Panzer IV's. I don't have any shots on the Panzer IV's. He's gone hull down, which is probably, we're going to be seeing that in the Panzer IV's review. That's going to be the next review we do. Okay, T-34-85 comes up, and he sits there, so we put a shot into him. Now, we couldn't see the Panzer IV's. The Panzer IV's was able to put a shot into me. This is such a big tank. Quite often you think you're hidden, and you're not. But at this point I decide, you know what, I've got 281 health, and that Panzer IV's, he's going to be doing about 130 damage, so I can afford to take another shot. So I move up, and it doesn't look as if he's been paying attention. So aim fully, and when you aim fully, the accuracy on this tank is quite good. So we're up to 3 kills, we're up to 1600 damage. But when you're top tier in the in the SU-100Y, you can be a bully. Unfortunately, you can see that even though I've been shot at by tier 6, by tier 5 tanks, I've only actually managed to bounce 1 shot. My tracks managed to absorb 1 shot, but everything else has penned me. So AFK, Churchill 1. Now I go for a turret shot eventually. What am I doing? Waiting for the tank to fully aim. And here's this really poor reload, because this guy's AFK. This is easy XP, easy credits, and I'm on a 14-second reload, and RT takes him out. So it was about 4 or 5 seconds before I could reload, and RT is able to take him out. So we've just bounced a birch gun. My tracks absorb the shot, and again, just swing around, take him out. Not much, another kill, but not much damage done. But I'm on 2k damage, I'm on 4 kills, and as I say, you can be a bully in this tank. T-67 decides to sit in front of me, let the gun in, aim in a little bit, and we're up to kill number 5. So, when this tank is top tier, the gun is amazing, but I think the next replay is a tier 7 game, but even when you're not top tier, this is a really good gun. But I think the SU-100Y, when it gets top tier, you can play it a little bit more aggressively. Use your hit points as armor, like I tried to do against the Panzer IV's. But you can see that the ground resistance is not fantastic. Most tanks struggle along here anyway. And I'm looking for Top Gun. Now, my team are actually going to let me get Top Gun. Really nice. Don't see it happen very often. The T-34 said I can get Top Gun, he just wants to spot the Bishop. So we're just trundling along here at 18 kilometers an hour. We're capping. And our T1 Heavy says our SU-100Y won the game. I don't think I did. This was a very easy game. But it just shows you how devastating this gun can be against lower tier tanks. So aim. Don't want to miss the shot, and there we go. So I fire mainly AP in this tank. I very rarely have the opportunity to switch to premium or to HE, but the ammo choices are very good, and the gun can be very good as well. So for that little example, I picked up an Ace Tanker, a Pascucci's Medal, High Caliber, Tank Sniper, and Top Gun, and I really didn't have to do much. This is such a good gun when it is top tier. 2,500 damage. Now you can get bigger damage games in the SU-100Y, providing you live long enough to fire those shots, but I can't complain with 6 kills and some nice XP, 1441. I fired 11 and I hit 10, so 0.38 accuracy on the gun is quite good. It is in fact very good for a Russian tank. Because I had Binox enabled, I got 1100 assistance damage, and this is really important. You're also going to see that in the next replay further along in the review. It's a good gun. It's a very very, very good gun, and it's the biggest positive this tank has, along with the fact you could train crew members, but you could also earn credits. 73,000 or 74,000 credits earned with a premium account on an SU-100Y. Now, as I say, some games you get the opportunity to do damage, other games you die before being able to do any damage, but when you do get to do damage in this tank, you are going to earn credits. And this gun is good enough to damage tier 8s, and when you're shooting tier 8s, you can earn a lot more credits and a lot more XP than that. So let's talk about crew. And is the SU-100Y a good crew trainer? Well, it has a lot of crew members. It has 6 crew members. So you've got a commander, 2 gunners, a driver, and 2 loaders. No radio operator here, but most Russian TDs, or no Russian TD, actually uses a radio operator. So is it a good crew trainer? Well, we need to look at the tech tree. Now, on all the lower tier Russian tanks, they've either got a 3-man crew, or they've got a 4-man crew, and continues on up past the SU-100. SU-100M1 only has 4 crew members, and the SU-101 only has 4 crew members. So when we consider that the SU-100Y has a huge crew, you can basically see that you need to have an extra gunner and an extra loader from somewhere if you're pursuing one line of Russian TDs. And again, it gets complicated at tier 9 to tier 10, because going from the SU-101 to the SU-122-54 and the 263, these 2 tanks both have the same crew layout. So you get a commander, a gunner, a driver, 2 loaders, which means you can train up these crews completely in the SU-100Y, but you're still going to need to find a gunner from somewhere. So you're always going to need an extra gunner. Now, I'm quite lucky in the fact that I actually went up both Russian TD lines at the same time. So no matter what happened, I always had a spare gunner. If I was training up an SU-152 crew, I'd use a gunner from an SU, this line of tanks, or vice versa. If I was training up a crew for my second line of Russian TDs, I'd use a spare gunner from the first line of Russian TDs. But going up the original line from the SU-100 to 4 crew members, we go to the SU-152, and again you could see that we need an extra gunner, and that continues through the ISU-152, the 704, and the Object 268. All of these tanks have the same crew layout, but you are going to need an extra gunner from somewhere. Now, that means that the SU-100Y, if you do have extra crew members, is an exceptionally good crew trainer, because you can train up every single Russian TD crew fully. You have no crew members left over. You can train up the original line of Russian TDs, you can train up the new line of Russian TDs. Those crews can be trained up fully as long as you have a spare gunner or a spare loader if you're going up some of the tanks. But it's a very, very good crew trainer. And on the bright side, even if you don't have a spare gunner or a spare loader and you need one, you'll be training up a spare gunner and a spare loader in the SU-100Y for a time when you will need them. So you can basically train up, if you're going through low tiers, you can basically train up 1.5 crews at the same time in an SU-100Y, and if you're going through the higher tiers, you can basically train up a whole crew and an extra gunner at the same time. So I think the SU-100Y, even though it doesn't match the crew slots on all the Russian TDs perfectly, because it's got so many crew members, it's nice to be able to train up extra crew members in the tank. Now, while I think the SU-100Y is a pretty good crew trainer, I do want to point out that personally I don't use this tank to train up new crews. It's one of the few premium tanks I own that I will not put a new 75% crew in. In fact, I don't even use the SU-100Y for 100% crews, because I think this tank absolutely needs 6th sense, because it's so big, because its camo rating is so poor, because it gets spotted so easily, because the view range is so bad. You absolutely have to have 6th sense. And when I started playing games for the review in this tank, I put my SU-152 crew in here, and the SU-152 crew are 100%, but they don't have 6th sense. And I found myself dying very quickly. I was being spotted and getting shot at before I could see what was shooting me. Even when I thought I was safe in a bush, you've got to remember this thing is like an E100. It's bigger than an E100, so it needs to be a very, very big bush in order to hide your tank behind it, and not very many bushes can hide an E100. So you will find yourself getting spotted, you will find yourself taking hits, you'll find yourself getting one hit killed by arty without even knowing you were spotted, unless you have 6th sense on this tank. So do not put a 75% crew in the SU-100Y. At least my advice is Play it with a 100% crew, play it with a crew that you're already playing in another tank and that you're building up, but don't train up brand new crews in the SU-100Y, because the tank does have quite a few faults, and 75% crew just makes all those faults much worse. Moving on to equipment, there are quite a few equipment choices for the SU-100Y, and quite a few of them are viable. Now, I have gone for improved vents because it helps me in some different areas where I feel the tank is weak. It helps me with my aim time, it helps me with the reload, it helps me with my view range, all areas where I think the tank is weak. So vents is an option for me, but you may decide differently. I think a wet ammo rack is a complete and utter waste of time on this tank. If you get spotted, you're usually going to get hit, take damage, and die pretty soon afterwards. So yes, if you do get ammo racked, and you will get ammo racked in this tank, just use a repair kit. Don't waste credits on a wet ammo rack. There are much better pieces of equipment. A toolbox is only viable if you're putting a new crew in this tank. As you can see, my crew, quite a lot of them have repair skill. However, I don't recommend putting new crews in here, so I don't recommend a toolbox. But if you're playing on a budget, you've got no other choice, a toolbox isn't going to hurt the tank, but I do think there are better pieces of equipment. A large caliber gun rammer is an absolute must on this tank because the DPM is terrible. The reload time can be incredibly painful. Because you're so slow, the reload is so long, this tank doesn't do well against multiple enemy tanks. You've got to get that reload down, and a gun rammer is the best way to do that. So a gun rammer, definite piece of equipment for this tank. A heavy spall liner is a complete waste of time because your armor is not very good. Any tank shooting HE at you, the majority of them are going to pen, they are going to do full damage. I think they're a better piece of equipment. This is very expensive, and even though this tank does take a lot of HE damage, I don't recommend it. But again, if you find yourself taking a lot of HE damage, the choice is up to you. Filling the tanks with CO2 is a complete and utter waste of time. I'm not going to even explain why. Enhanced gun laying drive is another viable piece of equipment. I know some SU-100Y drivers I platoon with occasionally who do use a gun laying drive in addition to the gun rammer. The choice is completely up to you. I don't find the aim time that bad on the tank because the reload is so slow, but if you are taking snapshots or you are trying to get your aim time down, then a gun laying drive is perfectly viable. Cyclone filter to increase your engine durability, complete and utter waste of time. Coated optics is a viable choice on this tank if you like playing it a little bit more aggressively. Now, there is a school of thought that thinks this is not really a passive sniper, and it can be played because it does have okay speed, it does have okay maneuverability. It can be played more as a support tank. Stay with your heavies, stick behind them, pop out, take a shot, fall back into cover. Personally, I don't find that style of play in the SU-100Y very rewarding. I find it very frustrating. I have a lot of bad games, occasionally have a good game, but playing this tank aggressively just doesn't work for me. If you do play it a little bit more aggressively, a little bit more as a support tank, and you are good enough, and I'll stress that, you have to be good enough to play it like that, then coated optics is a viable option. I prefer to use binocs because coated optics only gives me 35 extra meters view range. Binocs takes me up to 446, so I play this tank a lot more passively. I don't like getting spotted. I do like spotting my own targets. I think the binocs do more suit me better, especially as I play the tank more passively as a sniper, although some guides tell you that this is not a sniper. 0.38 accuracy is good, guys. It is good, especially on a Russian TD. So even though some guides will advise not sniping in this tank, I think sniping is the way to go. So binocs are definitely a good choice of equipment for me. Camo net is a complete and utter waste of time on this tank. As I say, this is a T100. It's a super heavy tank chassis. So this tank is as big as an E100. It's bigger than a KV5. It's as big as a KV4. It has no camo rating. And even when you're trying to use bush mechanics and think you're hidden behind a bush, there are very few bushes that are big enough to hide an E100. There are very few bushes that are big enough to hide an SU-100Y. So I think a camo net, again, the only reason you might put a camo net on this tank is if you're playing on a budget and you've got no other choice. Okay folks, time for the overview game, a game where I show you as many strengths and weaknesses of whatever tank I'm reviewing in one replay. We are here on Sacred Valley. I'm platooned with Bringy and Beyond D. Beyond D is already in his SU-100Y. Unfortunately, I was AFK at the beginning of this game. I can't remember why, so I got a 30-second later start than the other tanks. They're already up the hill. But as you can see, we're doing 35 kilometers along here while the ground was fairly straight. And then when we hit the going uphill, we start losing speed. So this tank can struggle. You see we're down to 14 kilometers an hour. Going uphill, you really do feel the slower power to weight or the low power to weight ratio. And yeah, my team are already doing damage without me. I'm keeping an eye in case that T-3485 comes around this side of the rocks. But Beyond D is also in an SU-100Y. Now the major difference between the way we've got our tanks set up here is I'm using binocs, and Beyond D is using a gun laying drive to improve his aim time. But I've moved up, finally got into position, enemy SU-100Y, and there we go, 413 damage. Now again, this is an example of me just playing this tank maybe a little bit incorrectly, because while I am going to be playing much more passively than I did in the first game, I basically stick with the AP. I very rarely shoot premium ammo. I just find, as I say, the switching between ammo types taking 14 seconds between shots, it means quite often I miss the opportunity to do damage or get a shot in. So, tog, Beyond is aiming, I'm aiming, and boom, I do 490. And I think Beyond does 409, but that Tog isn't feeling so healthy anymore. 2 shots from an SU-100Y, and he's down to 27 health. So there we go, double tagged again. Beyond does almost 500 damage. I finish off the KV-1. So yeah, even though I started the game late, I'm on 1,000 damage, and now tanks are starting to appear in the valley below us. So we just need these tanks to advance. Now I'm using my binocs, and Beyond doesn't have binocs equipped, so I'm actually the one doing the spotting here. Cromwell gets taken out, and again, 2 shots from 2 SU-100Ys. Now I do get spotted by I know I'm pretty safe from the left, but there's that armor. Unfortunately, pretty much most tanks that shoot you are going to be able to pen you, but T-29 need him to advance. And again, my binocs have kicked in, and we sneak a shot in. Another 414 damage. And Beyond finishes him off. So you could see the high alpha damage of this gun, especially when you've got 2 SU-100Ys shooting at you. Now, because the game is running to an end, or it's coming to a close, we've only got 4 tanks left on the enemy team. Now it's time to show you the mobility of this tank. Now, as I say, a lot of people talk about how good the mobility is of the SU-100Y, and while I don't think it's bad, I like to keep things in context, and it's basically very similar, it's worse than a lot of other Tier 6 TDs. So, for a big heavy tank, the maneuverability and speed are quite good, but it's a huge heavy tank, and when you compare the mobility of this, for example, compared to an SU-100, or a Hellcat, or even a Jackson, those tanks have an advantage when it comes to mobility. But Churchill 1 has appeared, gets derped in the face by the FV304. Moving in, don't know if I'm going to have any shots here. But yeah, I mean, we're doing 18 kilometers along here, and there we go. If you rush your shots, aim before, or don't aim before shooting, you're going to have a bad time. And Beyond manages to kill him, and that was probably my kill. I should have gotten that kill, but unfortunately I took a snapshot when I didn't need to. You need to let this gun aim fully. Enemy team are down to 3 tanks. So Hummel in the distance, he's moving, and I aim as long as I risk, and finally kill, or not finally, but kill him with the 1 shot. So shooting similar tier, lower tier tanks, this is an awesome gun, and it's capable of doing damage against higher tier tanks. The accuracy can be quite good, it can also be quite bad if you take a lot of snapshots, and I don't have much to shoot at, and someone else takes him out. So Beyond's on 4 kills, I'm on 3 kills, just 1 tank left on the enemy team. And once again, you can see the slow acceleration here. It's not a terribly slow tank. It's not painfully slow, but I definitely would not call this a maneuverable tank. So we're capping, there's only a minute left of this game. RT is probably run, and we're just going to see if we can find him. Now I've got 458 health left, and that means RT can potentially kill me if he shoots and penetrates. Unfortunately, he's looking my way. My tracks eat the shot. He kills my driver, but there we go. I mean, anything that has less than 400 health is pretty much going to be a one-hit kill. So 2 SU-100Ys platooned can be devastating as long as they get the opportunity to sit and just shoot. That's what happened in that game. It was another ace tanker, and as you could see, I finished top in XP with 1206. Beyond finished with 1059, even though he did more damage. He did 600 more damage than I did. But the major difference between these two XP totals is the fact that even though he did more damage, Beyond D got very, very little assistance damage. He was using a gun laying drive to improve his aim time, whereas I wasn't, and I used binocs, and that gives me the extra view range that allows me to spot some of my own targets and allowed me to pick up 1265 assistance damage. So just one piece of equipment in difference between the two tanks, and it had a big impact on the result. So I fired 9 and I hit 7, so the accuracy even at long distance is very, very good. A lot of those shots were fired at extremely long distance. The damage is good, the alpha damage is good, the reload can be a bit of a pain, but you can't complain when you get results like this. Once again, 62,500 credits earned with a premium account. This is a moneymaker. When you get the opportunity to do damage in a SU-100Y, you will make money. Unfortunately, some of those games you get to do absolutely no damage, and as a result, you don't earn quite as much money. It's all about the damage in the SU-100Y. Okay folks, time to sum up. Is the SU-100Y worth 3,250 gold? Well, this is a tank with a heck of a lot of weaknesses and very few strengths, and what few strengths it does have, a lot of them are cancelled out by weaknesses. Starting off with the hit points, it gets 700 hit points. That's a positive. It gets a lot of hit points for a tier 6 TD, but that's cancelled out by the fact it only gets 60 millimeters of armor all round, and because it doesn't get special matchmaking, you're going to be facing tier 7s, you're going to be facing tier 8s, and as a result the armor counts for nothing. So I think even though the armor on paper is good for a tier 6 TD, it's only effective against lower tier tanks, and even then might not be effective. Lots of lower tier tanks are going to have no problem spinning you, so you end up using these 700 hit points as a almost armor. You trade hit points for damage done in this tank. The engine power is a positive. It's got a very, very powerful engine, 890 horsepower. I think that's the most powerful tier 6 engine there is, but that's cancelled out by the fact the tank weighs 65 tons, so the horsepower to weight ratio is quite poor, even though it gets a very powerful engine. The top speed of 35 kilometers an hour is quite good for a TD, but when you put it into perspective and compare it against all the other tier 6 TDs, it's on the slow side. And the traverse speed, again, 30 degrees per second, it's not great, but compared to all the other tier 6 TDs, it's definitely on the low side. It's one of the slowest, and when you combine that top speed and traverse speed with the fact it's got poor horsepower to weight ratio, and it also has poor terrain resistance for a TD, then the tank definitely performs a little bit more sluggishly than people would have you believe. So while I do think the tank is fast and can maneuver well for the size of the tank and the weight of the tank, in putting it, as I say, keeping it in context versus a lot of the other tier 6 TDs, I definitely don't think it's a top performer. The view range is absolutely terrible on this tank. It only has 350 meters, so even after all the regular tanks in game got nerfed, they still have better view range than the SU-100Y. It does have the same view range as the in-game SU-100, but most other tier 6 TDs have it beaten, and the signal range is terrible on the tank as well. It's a very, very good crew trainer. It's got 6 crew members, and it means you can train up every single Russian tank destroyer crew in the game in this tank, but you are going to need extra gunners, you are going to need extra loaders. Now, while it's a very, very good crew trainer, that's cancelled out by the fact I don't recommend putting untrained crew in this tank. If you put a 75% crew in this tank, it's going to make the tank much, much worse. You're going to end up hating the tank. Even a 100% crew in this tank without 6 sense is something I don't recommend. So really, I think it's a good crew trainer only for established crews that you already have and you've already trained up. I think the tank performs much worse with a bad crew, and I couldn't really recommend buying this tank as a crew trainer for new crews. If you've already got some high tier crews with some skills, then yeah, it's a better crew trainer than it would be for a new player with new crews. The tank also has some other weaknesses. It only has 5 degrees of gun depression, so this is definitely not a hill warrior. When you consider how sluggish it is, the poor horsepower to weight ratio trying to reach the top of a hill, and the fact you've only got 5 degrees of gun depression means you expose pretty much most of your tank when you try to get your gun on target. In addition to that, the gun is quite low down on the hull, and because this is such a tall tank, it's as big as an E-100, this entire area above your gun is exposed if you try to go hull down or if you try to use this tank on slopes. You can be penned and spotted and shot here without even realizing that this entire part of your tank is exposed. It's a huge tank. As I say, it's as big as an E-100, and its camo rating as a result is absolutely terrible. So it can be quite hard to find good TD positions in an SU-100Y because a traditional TD position that has bushes might not be suitable because the tank is just too big. Bush is too small to cover the tank, and too much of the tank is left exposed. It will earn you credits because of the amazing gun. This tank is a tank that it's a tier 6 premium tank, but it can decimate. If it in the right conditions, it can decimate tier 8 tanks. It's got great ammunition, it's a great gun, it has no problems doing damage, even bottom tier. Against tier 8s, tier 7s, this gun will do damage, it will earn you credits, it will earn you XP. So it's a good gun, but it's still not perfect. As I say, it's only got 5 degrees of gun depression. The rate of fire is very slow. So even fully upgraded with a great crew, I've only got a 14-second reload here, and that's going to be much worse with a new crew in the tank. So the rate of fire is poor, which means this tank can't hold up against multiple enemy tanks at the same time. But as I say, the ammo is fantastic. Choice of ammo is fantastic. The accuracy is very good for a Russian TD, and the aim time, while not fantastic, is not terrible. I think the aim time is okay on the tank, but this tank is all about its gun. It's all about its alpha damage. It's all about being able to do damage to higher tiered tanks. The problem is, as soon as you get spotted, you're very reliant on your team and you end up dying very quickly. So you've got to be quite careful in this tank, and it's another reason why I recommend you don't play this tank unless you have 6th sense on your commander. So overall, I think the SU-100Y has a lot of problems, far more problems than it does have positives, but that doesn't mean it's not a fun tank to play. When it's a tank you take out on these rare occasions, like I do, sometimes it can be a lot of fun to play. But if it was a tank I had to sit down and play game after game after game in and grind a new crew or grind XP in this tank, I wouldn't enjoy it very much, because the SU-100Y's biggest problem is its consistency. It's very team reliant, it's very matchmaker reliant, even though it doesn't mind, or I don't mind, getting into a bottom tier in a tier 8 game, but you are very reliant on your teams, and for every good game you have in the SU-100Y, you have 4 or 5 average games. You have 2 or 3 very poor games. There were games yesterday where I was playing games for the review where I got 1-hit killed by Arty before I'd even spotted an enemy. The camo rating is just so bad, and trying to play this tank without 6th sense is very frustrating. Never even saw the tank that spotted me, and next thing I know, I'm sitting happily in my bush and I'm dead, 1-hit killed. Arty will focus on you. Your armor is that bad. And if you were looking for a Russian tank destroyer that was more consistent, I would recommend the SU-122-44 a tier higher, at tier 7. Even though it's not as good a crew trainer, it only gets 4 crew members, I think that tank performs much more consistently than an SU-100Y. This is definitely not a tank I would recommend for a new player, because I think that it's just, I don't think you can learn how to play World of Tanks in an SU-100Y. I just don't think the tank is consistent enough. And I think an SU-100Y would really benefit from someone having some other premium tanks in their garage, so that you could alternate, because as I say, trying to play this tank game after game after game, I would soon start hating the tank. And I don't hate the tank. I like the tank. I like the fact it's unique. I like the fact that there's no other tank in World of Tanks quite like the SU-100. It is a very, very unique tank with a very, very unique gun, and I like taking it out on special occasions. But as I say, if I were trying to grind it and play it game after game after game, like I was trying to do for the review, I would very quickly end up hating it. I started out the review games with a 100% crew but no Sixth Sense, and I lasted about 7 or 8 games before I had to remove the crew and put a skilled crew in here before I started having any good games in the tank. I think it's unique, I think it's special, you're going to want it if you're a tank collector, but as a first premium tank or even a second premium tank, I don't think I could recommend the SU-100Y, at least not at full price. 3,250 gold could be spent on a lot of better things in World of Tanks. So yes, as much as I like this tank, I don't think it's worth it. It's just not consistent enough, and I definitely couldn't recommend it to a new player. That's not to say it's not fun, that's not to say you can have amazing games in it, but I just don't think it's consistent enough. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.